All right, the word is officially out because once again, I got busted. My neighbors now know all about my welding operation in here. It's been about a year or so since this happened last time. To be honest, I was kind of hoping it would just be the one time, but it happened again. These days, it's never been easier to get a great welding setup at your house. You can get incredible machines delivered right to your doorstep, and without too much effort or setup, you can get cracking out some really nice welds pretty much right away. So anybody with a welding setup at home knows once word gets out that you are up and running, people are gonna be banging your door down trying to get you to do jobs for them. That last job I did for one of my neighbors, turned out it was actually pretty awesome to do. Even though I didn't feel like doing it, still did it anyway, had a good time. So once again, somebody has thrown the bat signal up in the sky for me to help, and they need help to build a gate for their dog. And they said they needed something to keep their dog from barking furiously and escaping and running up to people when they showed up at their house. Sounds pretty scary, right? Anybody that watches my channel knows I love dogs. I used to have 2 dogs that were on the episodes with me all the time here. They're not here anymore, unfortunately. I miss them a ton. So obviously, I'm biased to helping people out when it comes to dog stuff. So let's take a look at the material we got to work with here. We have some square tube, and the design is actually pretty simple. I've been supplied with some drawings that actually aren't too bad. So let's get into it. All right, I just bought this brand new saw blade for my chop saw as well. I'm really excited to get going with this one. I'm using a cutting fluid that I'm gonna spray on the blade to make sure that nothing heats up too much, and this thing cuts like butter. It is so smooth. But if you go nice and slow with a ton of cooling fluid on your blade, this thing lasts a really long time. So once I get all my pieces together here and I start assembling the gate, I'm actually laying it out in front of me and having a good look at it. And I'm starting to notice that a lot of these fence rungs are actually really close together. Notice something else about it as well? Look how tall this thing is overall. Or come to think of it, how short. I'm starting to think that the ferocious guard dog I had pictured in my head, this doesn't really seem like it's adding up anymore. The more I think about this, it looks like it might be for a small dog. Scratch that, a tiny dog. Maybe that's why I've never heard of barking before. But regardless, let's keep this little puppy safe and finish this badass little gate. Okay, now that we have everything cleaned and ready to go, let's weld. I'll start with tacking it all together. Then I can check a few things before committing and welding the entire thing out. As I finish each corner, I'm checking for a rough square. Once it's close enough, I'm good to move on. I'll check this more closely after I finish tacking it all together. With my tacks, I want them strong, but I need them to stay relatively small. Having big tacks will be tough to keep a consistent profile over when I'm welding over them later. Okay, now that it's all tacked together, I'll measure from corner to corner. This is the best way, in my opinion, to check for square. Okay, now let's go over something really important here. Look at this graphic. So as we begin to weld, we have no areas where the hot air can flow in or out of this piece. We essentially have a sealed unit. As we begin to weld, the air will start to expand as we near the completion of sealing it, and hot air will not be able to escape anywhere. So what will happen is this hot air will then blow back at the very end and ruin your weld. So in order to give the air a place to go, so it doesn't wreck our weld out, we will drill a small hole on the bottom called a weep hole. Now, as we seal it, the air can escape here, not the area that we are trying to seal up. Now that we're ready, one last wire brush to get everything good to go. We get comfortable, we start welding. Doing each pass here, I want to get my profile as consistent as possible. I want a consistent width, and I want to go around each side. And as I go around each side, I want everything to be as uniform to one another as possible. As we can see here, not the most comfortable I've ever been for a weld, but most importantly, I can see clearly, and this is absolutely the most vital part to something like this. I make sure when I'm doing these passes not to overfill or underfill, and I'm watching my overall reinforcement as I go to maintain consistency. You can see here I'm putting a clamp on the frame, so now I can rest my wrist here instead. I have more comfortable travel, and now my wrist isn't gonna touch the hot surface. Now when going around corners like this, I need to make sure I connect each pass. This will prevent voids or gaps in between passes, so it's gonna help out the overall consistency. Again, I'm just watching to match my overall width and reinforcement. I can keep my weld looking uniform as I go around the whole thing. As I'm flipping it around, I'm using clamps to keep things stable. This way, when I work around the frame as I weld, I'm always remaining comfortable and I'm always keeping things secure. I don't want any rocking or wobbling. Okay, now let's check the dimensions again. Sometimes they move around as I weld them, so let's see how I did with my setup and controlling my heat as I welded it out. Oh yeah, buddy. Now, while my corners may be good, I need to check how flat it stayed overall. And after looking at it, we can see that I've got a couple high spots and it's now rocking when placed on a flat surface. No problem, let's fix it before we go any further. So I'm using 2 wood blocks here and here. What these are gonna do is they're gonna elevate the low sides, Now what I can do is I can press the high sides down to meet the 2 low sides. Now this is not the smoothest or safest way to do this, but hey, we gotta get the job done and we do it how we can, right? Quickly eyeballing my 2 edges to one another, and it looks way better already. Now what I'm doing here is I'm laying out my spacing for the rungs in the middle. Once it's all marked out, I can use a square to draw each line so I can make sure that they all stay straight and don't rotate or twist at all. We're doing the same thing like 15 times here, so if one piece is not straight or level, it's gonna look uneven and it's gonna stand out like a sore thumb. Now, what do we learn about weep holes and sealing areas when we're welding? So yep, we gotta take the time to weep hole each one of these stanchions. It takes a while, but it's all good. It's gonna make welding these out much easier to wrap up. Now, I'm making a shim so that I can set each piece so it'll be centered properly as well. Using my combo square, I can now set this distance so I can use this as my guide for each piece. All I have to do is knock each piece in and then I can check it with the guide. And following my layout for spacing, straightness, now centering is gonna make them even more perfect. Now as I get my main ones in the center locked down and happily on my layouts, I can now start tacking them in place. And at this point, making sure everything stays in place should be really easy. Everything turns out as good as your layout. Now at this point, everything is going really well up until I realize at this point I have made a mistake. Okay, I made a oopsie. Cut one of these, a little bit short. So lucky enough, I got a little bit of material left over. I'm gonna splice a piece on the end here. Let's see if the dude even notices. So treating this one little piece like every other piece, I've beveled it so now I can get good penetration when I weld it, and now I'm gonna clean it. I wanna get the finish on it as good now, and it's gonna help to match the consistency after I weld it. The real trick will be to keep it straight. If it's crooked at all, this is gonna stand out really badly. Remember, I've got 14 other ones of these I have to match. If it's out at all, it's gonna stand out and you're gonna be able to spot it from a mile away. Now getting solid penetration is a lot harder when you've only got a little tiny weld to work with. Getting things to blend in consistently right at the start and stop, especially on the corners, is really important. Any lack of penetration is gonna cause cracks really fast as I weld it out later or when I grind these off. All right, looks half decent outside, but now looking inside, we can see the penetration is consistent and it has connected really well from pass to pass in the corners. That will do nicely. Now we're gonna grind the surfaces flat, and trying to get the 2 pieces to match perfectly, this is gonna be a bit tricky, but finishing grinding is one of my favorite things to do. And between a flapper disc, a Scotch-Brite pad, and an orbital sander with 120 grit on it, I can round my corners and make sure all the surfaces are matching. Now at this point, I can just use a Scotch-Brite hand pad and use it lengthwise to add a grain direction. Looking at it carefully under the light, we can see it pretty much matches perfectly. No harm, no foul. All right, now to tack this one in place so it matches the layout pattern. Nobody is ever gonna notice this one. So we have drilled the weep holes, we have followed our layout pattern, and we have tacked them all exactly how I want them. Keeping everything clean as I went, now I'm gonna wire brush the joints one more time, and it is time to begin final weld out. Running these fillets as quick and as hot as I could, this is gonna help with distortion. As you can see here, I am bouncing around a little bit of weld over here, a little bit of weld over there. Then I move to a completely different area. Spreading the heat out is a great way to not overheat one specific area. This is gonna help to control distortion. Now moving around to flip the piece and spreading the passes out definitely takes more time, which on a hot day like today kind of sucks. But this is gonna help save me a lot of headaches later if I have to straighten it. So once again, you can see I am not being shy about giving these passes good heat. I wanna move quick. Obviously these clips have been sped up a little bit, but you get the idea. Keeping the profile straight and from spilling over the edges a little bit here. This is gonna help to keep the profile and look of the overall welding really consistent. Here's the spot where we would have blowback occurring if the sealed area did not have a weep hole. But now a nice button is easy to drop and everything comes up nicely. This is honestly probably the first really heavy duty welding I've done over a long period of time in my shop here. Not to mention it was over 30 degrees here today. So once I got working on this one, it was smoking hot in the shop. This machine and its setup did not even flinch at the amount of welding I was putting it through, and the torch hardly even heated up to anything more than a little bit warm the entire time today. And one of the things that probably helped me out the most today with the heat is these welding sleeves right here. And although I've used them a decent amount here and there, this is the first time I actually wore them for a really long time. They got to break in nice on this one. This thing was an absolute blast to weld. I talk about positivity on my channel all the time and doing anything we can to help people in need. While I honestly don't always feel like doing jobs for people that ask, I love getting the opportunity to help somebody out. And at the same time, build something fun, learn a few things in the meantime, works out well for everybody. Even though that I do joke about hiding from my neighbors, I'm happy I could help out and make a little dog happy. Scratch that, a tiny dog.